Bienvenue à la réunion.
Welcome to meeting number 24, or 25 rather, of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-3H and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, December 13th, 2021, the committee is resuming its study of use and impact of facial recognition technology.
Witness, we have today, as an individual, Nestor Maslay, Research Associate, Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, Stanford University, and from the Privacy and Access Council of Canada, Sharon Polsky, President. Mr. Maslay, you have up to 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. So good afternoon, and I'd like to begin by thanking the chair and members of the committee for the invitation to speak today. So I'm Nestor Maslay, and currently I serve as a research associate for the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. I'm also a co-author and the lead researcher for the AI Index. And although my testimony today makes use of data from the AI Index, I'm speaking as a private citizen, and my views are not representative of those of the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. The AI Index is an annual report, currently in its 5th edition, that aims to track, distill, and visualize key trends in artificial intelligence. Our goal at the Index is to be the best and most authoritative single source of information on trends in AI. And the Index aims to give policymakers like yourselves not only a deeper understanding of AI, but also crucially, an understanding that is grounded in empirical data. It is this latter aim especially that informs my testimony today. I'm here to answer the question, what does data tell us about facial recognition technology? And I will answer this question by tackling 2 sub-questions. First, I will comment on capability. As of today, what can FRT do? Second, I will examine usage. Who uses FRT, public and private actors, and how? In terms of capability, there has been tremendous progress in the performance of facial recognition algorithms in the last 5 years. The Index looked at data from the National Institute of Standards and Technology's Face Recognition Vendor Test, which comes from the US Department of Commerce, which measures how well FRT performs on a variety of homeland security and law enforcement tasks, such as facial recognition across photojournalism images, identification of child trafficking victims, deduplication of passports, and cross-verification of visa images. In 2017, some of the top performing facial recognition algorithms had error rates anywhere from roughly 20 to 50% on certain FRVT datasets. As of 2021, none has posted an error rate greater than 3%, with the top performing models registering an error rate of 0.1%, meaning that for every 1,000 faces, these models correctly identified 999. The Index also shows that the performance of FRT deteriorates on masked faces, but not by an overly significant degree. So more specifically, performance is 5 to 16 percentage points worse, depending on the FRT algorithm and dataset. Now, in terms of usage, FRTs are becoming increasingly deployed in both public and private settings. In 2021, 18 of 24 US government agencies use these technologies, 16 departments for digital access or cybersecurity, 6 for creating leads in criminal investigations, and 5 for physical security. Moreover, 10 departments noted that they had hoped to broaden its use. These figures are admittedly US-centric, but they paint a picture of both, 1, how widely governments use these tools, and 2, towards what end. Since 2017, there has also been a total of $7.5 billion US dollars globally invested in funding startups dedicated to facial recognition. However, only 1.6 million of that investment has gone towards Canadian FRT startups. In the same time period, the amount invested in FRT technologies has increased 105%, which suggests that business interest in FRT is also growing. Our estimates also show that FRT is the 12th most funded out of 25 AI focus areas. Lastly, a McKinsey survey that we include in the index of leading business executives shows that across all surveyed industries, only 11% of businesses had embedded facial recognition technology in their standard business processes, which trailed robotic process automation at 26%, natural speech understanding at 14% as the most embedded technologies. In conclusion, I've presented some of the AI Index's key findings on the current capabilities and usage of FRT. It is my hope that the data I have shared usefully informs the committee's deliberation on the future regulation of facial recognition technologies in Canada, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions on the data that I've presented and the implications that it may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now Ms. Polsky for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. And good afternoon, members of the committee as well. And thank you for inviting me to appear before you today on behalf of the Privacy and Access Council of Canada. My remarks today reflect roundtables held by the Council with members from across the public and private sectors, and with members of law enforcement who agree that facial recognition is one of many digital tools that have great potential, but like any technology, facial rec is neither good nor bad, but it's easy to justify, especially when considered on its own. What people do with technology makes all the difference in reasonableness, proportionality, and impact on lives. 34 years ago, our Supreme Court said that privacy is at the heart of liberty in a modern state. Privacy is essential for the well-being of the individual, and privacy is, quote, worthy of constitutional protection. And I dare say it still is, except now we struggle to have any privacy at home or away. It's difficult now, if not impossible, to prevent our facial images being captured and analyzed, our movements and our associations being calculated and evaluated in real time. We are in view every time we go outside and often inside as well. And our images are posted to the internet, often without our knowledge. We haven't consented to those images being used, or to our gait, our keystrokes, or other biometrics being analyzed and correlated with databases that have been amassed with information about each of us. We haven't asked that the voice-activated devices or the messaging platforms that our children use at school and we use at work analyze our conversations or our emotions, or for our TVs to watch us watching them. Yet that is now commonplace thanks to governments and companies creating an unregulated global biometrics industry that's predicted to reach $59 billion US by 2025, while the tech companies embedded in the public sector urge us to use our faces to pay for groceries and to get government services. In 40 years, the computers have been part of our daily lives, though. There hasn't been any substantive education in Canada about privacy or access laws, rights, or responsibilities. So it's no surprise that Canadians trust that the laws themselves are enough to protect privacy, or that just 14% rate their own knowledge of their privacy rights as very good. Meantime, there's been an onslaught of automated privacy-invasive technologies and multi-million-dollar investments in surveillance technologies to create safe communities across Canada, purchased by the other 86% of people as well. Certainly, facial rec-enabled cameras in cars, body cams, doorbells, cell phones, they might help police identify a suspect or solve a crime, but even police admit that cameras and facial rec do not prevent crime, and there's little correlation between the number of public CCTV cameras and crime or safety, yet their unregulated sale and use are of self-fulfilling prophecy because familiarity breeds consent. Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, Cadillac Fairview, Tim Hortons, they're just the tip of the iceberg. Companies and governments can and do create or use technologies that violate our privacy laws because they can, because the current consent model is a fantasy, and because Mark Zuckerberg and others know that the risk of penalty is far less than the reward of collecting, manipulating, and monetizing information about us. We are at a moment, though, where three important changes are needed. to help safeguard our democratic freedoms without impeding innovation, and so that Canadians can regain trust in government, police, and the public sector. First, enshrine privacy as a fundamental human right for all Canadians, in person, online, and at our borders. Second, enact laws that require everyone who creates, purchases, or uses technology to demonstrate that they actually have a clear and correct grasp of our privacy laws, rights, and responsibilities. And third, in the same way that vehicles and food must meet stringent government regulations before being allowed for sale or use in Canada, craft laws that put the onus on creators, requiring that technologies undergo comprehensive, independent examination of their privacy, access, and algorithmic integrity, bias, and impact before the product or platform may be acquired or used, directly or indirectly, and make sure the standards set and the laws are written without direct or indirect influence or input of industry. Those are just a few highlights of a very complex issue I'm looking forward to discussing with you.
Thank you. And with that, we'll proceed to questions. And for the first 6 minutes, Mr. Williams.
Thank you to all our witnesses, and through you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with Ms. Polsky. We'll just ask a question. I think you mentioned this in your recommendations. Do we need proper education campaigns for Canadians on digital consent and privacy in the digital age?
We need education, substantive education, that explains what privacy is. It doesn't exist yet. And really, it's no different than me tossing my car keys to the kid across the street and saying, go have a good time, but stay safe out there, without explaining what a stop sign is or what to do when they see one. We need proper education, and we need the people who will be delivering the education to be educated firstly. We're lacking that right now.
And we've talked before about consent fatigue. So, people that aren't reading the Apple user or the consent form that's about 6 pages long, people scroll through it, and any kind of app that you download is the same kind of thing. Do you see that in your work? Did you see consent fatigue, and what do we do about it?
Well, consent fatigue is an interesting term. I think it's more a matter of people are resigned to the fact that no matter what they do or don't encounter in a so-called privacy policy is irrelevant, because the language that has been allowed and frankly embraced by Canadian, European, and other data protection regulators, the language is allowed to be so vague as to be meaningless. A perfect example is you'll typically see, of course, the introductory fluff, we respect your privacy. And then it's, we will only collect your personal information for business purposes, and a list of other vague terms. Every for-profit organization's business purpose is to improve their bottom line and their net profit. So anything they can do to improve it, to fulfill that obligation, is a legitimate business purpose as far as they're concerned. It's meaningless when it comes to individuals and protecting individuals, because when we say yes to any of these, the companies essentially have carte blanche to share our information with their business partners, whoever those might be, wherever in the world. And when it's outside of Canada, those companies do what they wish with it for as long as they wish.
So talking about the Privacy Act, we know it's outdated, needs to be updated. How would you update the Privacy Act?
The Privacy Act, I'd say it's important to stop having so many fractured puzzle pieces of privacy legislation federally and provincially, territorially, because each one, although they're very much alike, they're similar in most respects. They all have different exemptions, and it's almost impossible for anybody to know what law to comply with. If it's provincial, does it comply with this, or is it health legislation? Is it public sector? But then when it crosses the line out of the country or to a different jurisdiction, it's a nightmare for compliance. Have one overarching piece of legislation that covers the public sector and the private sector and the nonprofit sector and political parties as well. Please.
Okay, thank you. Almost every witness who's appeared before the committee, academics, lawyers, and civil liberty experts have called for a moratorium on the use of FRT. by police forces. I know you've conducted roundtables with law enforcement officers. What was their honest opinion on FRT use?
One after the other said, but the facial recognition we use right now, it pulls a selection of mugshots from our database, and then a person actually has to look at the suspect picture and the database and compare. That's fine. Not one of them could wrap their heads around the idea that there is such a thing as real-time live facial recognition already in use in some jurisdictions, and they insisted that this is what we have today. They couldn't see beyond what they use today or the implications for privacy and security that the new technology that they're not yet using.
So would you, for under your opinion, would you say that the rank and file members understand the FRT technology that they're using?
No, very simply no, because they're no different than most people across Canada, and I dare say elsewhere, without education about the correct compliance requirements, about what the legislation actually means, about what the technology actually can do, not the sales pitch. That's all they can rely on is the sales pitch from somebody, from a vendor whose interest is their commission, their company's bottom line. They are not interested in our protection or our privacy, or frankly, the police's problems.
And when those roundtables, would the actual rank and file, would they support an FRT moratorium? Would the rank and file support a moratorium on the use of FRT for police that you went through roundtables with?
When they can talk about themselves in their own lives, yes. And I've spoken with many members of law enforcement from across Canada in different agencies, municipal, federal, military. And they basically say, I'm not interested in being assumed to be a convict, a criminal. It's just a matter of time until I'm identified. I want to be able to go about my business anonymously. Just because I walk outside my door, I shouldn't always be under surveillance with somebody that I don't know who or where, trying to figure out who I am, who I'm with, and what I'm doing. But when the officers are in uniform, they have to toe the party line.
Thank you.
For that. And now on to Mr. Baines for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. My question is to Mr. Maslage. The Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence Index Report 2022 discusses diagnostic metrics which evaluate the model's impact or performance, for example, on population subgroups or minorities compared to the entire population. Can you comment on the research and investments being made to improve diagnostic metrics so that models do not misidentify persons from subgroups and minorities?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I would say that the index doesn't look into too much detail as to how much investment is being put into that area at the moment, but I would say that interest is growing. So one thing that I will note on the data that I cited from the NSIT FRT test, the data that I looked at.
I'm going to interrupt you, Mr. Masley. We're having a little bit of trouble with your audio. We had you tested earlier, and I understand it was all right, but not good right now. Can you ensure that you've selected the correct headset on your Zoom application?
Yeah, let me try once again. Is it better now?
I'll ask the translators. No. Okay.
One more time.
All right. I'm gonna suspend for a moment while we test this and get this straightened out. Suspended. Thank you. So I don't know if I need to get Mr. Baines to repeat a question, the question that we were on, and I think we'll do that. Mr. Baines, just briefly repeat your question, and we'll get to Mr. Maslay's response.
Yes, we were talking about improving diagnostic metrics so that models do not misidentify persons from subgroups and minorities, and getting thoughts on that.
Yeah, so apologies for that with the microphone. So I would say that the AI index doesn't comment directly on the amount of investment that exists in that space, but I think it alludes to the fact that this is becoming an increasing area of concern across a lot of different spaces. And I'll kind of highlight 2 points here. So the first is that with the data that I provided from the NSIT FRVT test, so this test looks at one-to-one verification, and in a brief that I submitted to the committee, in figure 1.1, I show the success of different models on a variety of different data sets. Now in this figure, one of the things that is very clear is that the best performing model is the one that performs on visa photos, and that's the one where you had correct identification 999 times out of 1,000, whereas the worst model is the one that is for the wild photos data set. And the wild photos data set is a data set of individuals whose faces might be obscured partially by shadows, or perhaps they weren't looking directly into the camera. And the top performing models identified correctly 970 out of 1,000 faces. Still very high, but there's a noticeable drop off from the visa photos. And I think this is suggestive of the fact that if companies and agencies want to use these technologies and justify these technologies on the ground that, oh, look, we tested them in the lab and they had a very high accuracy rate in the lab, there has to be an attempt to kind of qualify the difference between the settings in which these technologies are tested and the settings in which they are deployed. And I think that the committee is aware of this, but the index suggests that it is a pressing concern. I will also add that we do cite some research that was published a couple of years ago, and I think it's appeared in the committee as well in the form of a 2018 paper by Timnit Gebru et al. Called Gender Sage, which looks at the fact that a lot of facial analysis benchmarks tend to be overwhelmingly composed of light-skinned individuals, and this leads to subsequent bias, and that existing algorithmic systems tend to disproportionately misclassify darker-skinned females as the most misclassified group. So we do allude to this, and I think that there is a general sense in the research community that there should be more work being done in this space, but I would be unable to comment as to the exact amount of investment that is being put into this particular field at the moment.
Okay, so in November 2020, HAI published a report evaluating facial recognition technology. I think you talked a little bit about this in the clarity of the images here. And one of the concerns raised is that FRT vendors may train their images with well-lit, clear images, and with proper software, usage from machine learning professionals. But when deployed by law enforcement, FRTs rely on images produced by body cameras and other sources in suboptimal conditions. So, is this a problem that can be corrected? I mean, with respect to body cameras and law enforcement technology that they're using, how can that be improved?
So I think it might be perhaps outside of the scope of my area of expertise to identify ways in which that could be improved. I would, however, say that the paper that you're citing, I think the issue they talk about here is domain shift, the fact that very often the settings in which some of these algorithms are tested are radically different than the settings in which they are deployed. And I think at the minimum, there ought to be some kind of clarity and honesty about, in terms of the agencies that use these tools, whether it's companies or agencies, about the extent to which a difference exists between testing conditions and conditions in which these tools are actually deployed. I think it would be problematic if there was such a big discrepancy that these tools were tested in one setting but then deployed in completely different settings. And I think that if there isn't a clear sense and a clear understanding as to if this difference exists and whether this difference exists, then these technologies perhaps have a greater likelihood of being misused and serving more nefarious purposes.
And that takes me to my next question about the human error. It's also a concern with FRTs. So the same report indicates that while Amazon Rekognition recommends a 99% confidence threshold on identity matching for use in law enforcement, one of the sheriff's offices interviewed for the report stated, "We do not set nor do we utilize a confidence threshold." So do you think that any use of FRTs requires a trained professional that understands the technology, structure, and design?
Again, I didn't contribute to that report directly, so I wouldn't be best suited to answer the question. But I think perhaps the issue that the report is getting at there is one of institutional shift, that you might potentially have these technologies used by different individuals in different parameters. And certainly being trained in the usage of these systems can be important, but I think there's also a recognition here that unless there is some kind of set regulatory standard about what is an acceptable benchmark or acceptable framework, you might have different jurisdictions using these technologies in different ways. So the question of what this acceptable benchmark is one that is, again, outside of my area of expertise. I will leave it to you, policymakers, to kind of crack that one. But I think the point being made is that if a threshold doesn't exist, it's a lot likelier for individual agencies to kind of make these assertions themselves. And there are reasons why certain agencies might favor lower thresholds over higher thresholds, and this can lead to potential misuse with some of the technology.
Thank you, Mr. Masley. Maintenant, pour 6 minutes, Monsieur.
Now for 6 minutes, Mr. Villemur. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Ms. Polsky, if we determine understanding as being what is at stake, there seems to be a misunderstanding towards facial recognition by everyone, population, government. I have a couple questions for you. When we click accept, it's not a real choice. It's not a real choice of consent, is it?
That is, as I said in my remarks, the consent fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Zuckerberg himself said to the US Congress that even he doesn't read these things. The last time I counted, and yes, I did, the Google privacy policy was 38 pages long. Nobody is going to read it. And as a result, they're clicking on what? They don't know. The problem there, or the catch there is, at least under Canadian legislation, a company, an organization is only supposed to collect personal information after they have informed consent.
Mm-hmm.
When even Mr. Zuckerberg acknowledges that nobody reads these things, they are collecting personal information without informed consent, contrary to the provisions of PIPEDA and I think all of the other privacy laws across Canada.
I believe that those who wrote these policies have not read them themselves. In Europe, there is the possibility of continuing without accepting. Do you think that that is something that we should implement here in Canada?
If you're talking about getting rid of the cookie consents, that has become a farce, quite bluntly, because you see them on so many websites. There's some websites where you can go in to adjust your cookie settings, but then you can't get past that. You must accept all cookie settings, which is contrary to the GDPR. To say get rid of consent policies, well, the way of doing that is to put the onus not on you and me and individuals to read through these library books, but put the onus on the organizations and by law require them to stop collecting and distributing our information.
Do you trust that the industry might self-regulate?
We've already seen that happening in the United States, where the big technology companies have literally written the legislation that is being passed in several states, and they call that privacy law. It's not. It doesn't protect individuals. It doesn't give them any greater right to protection or privacy. And that's why in my remarks I said to craft these laws without the direct or indirect involvement of industry.
Présentement, donc, dans l'industrie.
So right now in the industry, you don't know any companies that are self-regulating and who might want to apply better practices as we would like to see them.
There are many, and I not only am the president of the Privacy and Access Council of Canada, but for roughly 30 years, I've been doing privacy impact assessments and privacy consulting privately. And I have, through that, been invited inside everything from governments and public bodies to Fortune 100s. I understand how they operate, the technologies they build, what they deploy. There are some who sincerely believe that they're doing it right. But remember, without education, they're misled. They're maybe assessing their own understanding a little favorably. Yet you get into situations where it's a Canadian company, they store the information in Canada, but they use third parties that are in the United States to provide essential services for that app or that service. And the company doesn't recognize that that is a problem. They don't notify the user. They don't have any concern. They're ignorant. They're totally unaware that there is a privacy implication.
Au meilleur de votre
To the best of your knowledge, is the RCMP using FRT, and do they understand its framework?
I have had opportunity to speak with a couple of very senior members of the RCMP, and they had, I think, a solid understanding. They are genuinely concerned. Their hands, I might say, are tied sometimes. Sometimes the technology is bought or trialed by somebody and nobody else knows it. And that goes on in private sector organizations also. Instead of going through an approval process, somebody just goes, buys something, plugs it in. And if you don't know it's there, you can't monitor it and you can't sanction it. So whether the RCMP actually is using facial rec, I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't doubt it.
OK. Est-ce que vous pourriez nous dire...
Can you tell us a bit more about the necessary education? If we do want to raise awareness, who can provide this education and what would it require?
I know there's a professor at the University of McGill a few years ago that I was discussing with about developing some education to be rolled out to schools. There's media organizations, there's various privacy commissioners across the country that have developed little courses, little programs. They're available. They're not mandatory, though. And I recognize there's a problem because it's federal, but education is provincial. But to have,
I'm very sorry, but we're getting to be quite a bit over time, and we're quite pressed today in our schedule. So I am going to have to switch and give the floor to Mr. Green for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My questions will be for Dr. Masly. The rapid expansion and development of AI technology comes with significant risks. Chapter 3 of your Artificial Intelligence Index report outlines some of the harms of AI technologies, including commercial facial recognition systems that discriminate based on race, resume screening systems that discriminate based on gender, AI-powered clinical health tools that are biased along socioeconomic and racial lines. These models have been found to reflect and amplify human social biases, discriminate based on protected attributes, and generate false information about the world. Quote, could you please elaborate on some of these harms and risks posed by the use of AI technologies, and particularly at a time when investment and development of technologies is so rapidly accelerating?
Certainly. And I think that's an excellent question. And I think it speaks to the fact that although regulation of facial recognition technologies certainly matter, there are also other AI use cases that might also merit regulatory attention. And I think one of the takeaways from the data that we have on facial recognition is that facial recognition is kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of total private investment. You know, it's more invested than things like drones or legal tech, but it's behind NLP and medical and healthcare, which suggests as well that there are other AI use cases that might merit further attention. And as the data from the McKinsey survey suggests, facial recognition is not as embedded in certain business technologies and processes as are other AI systems. Now, again, this doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't care about facial recognition regulation. It's an issue of utmost importance, just that we should also be cognizant as to what other problems AI might pose, especially at a time in which AI is becoming increasingly more ubiquitous. So you alluded to a couple of the different examples that we cited in the report. I'll speak to a couple of different ones, but we talked about the fact that there are resume screening systems that have shown to discriminate based on gender. And we cite evidence from a newspaper article about the fact that a couple of years ago, Amazon developed a machine learning resume screening system that was shown to systematically downgrade the applications of women. So again, it would be very ideal for a lot of these companies, especially the very big ones, if someone gave them 100 resumes, they could just give them to a machine and the machine says automatically, these are the best 3 candidates, just hire these 3 people. Now, the reason that Amazon trained a bias system was because the system was ultimately trained on data of resumes that were submitted to Amazon previously, and overwhelmingly the resumes that tended to be submitted to Amazon were those submitted by men. And this reflects the fact that the tech industry is mostly dominated by men. So given that men were mostly traditionally hired, the AI system learned to penalize the term woman, which means that if you included a resume that, for example, said, I was the captain of the women's swim team, the algorithm sees that historically very few women had been hired at Amazon. This person has woman in their resume. Let's downgrade this resume. Now, Amazon kind of claimed that this tool was not actually ever deployed to make hiring decisions, but the point kind of stands that this bias remains. We also talk about bias in multimodal linguistic models. We talk as well about bias in medical image segmentation. I could go on at length about that, but I'll give you the opportunity to perhaps pose additional questions.
I do have additional questions on the types of regulatory frameworks that you think are needed. Very important to this committee is going to be our recommendations. So, Doctor, if you could talk about, what frameworks are needed to protect Canadians when it comes to the use of these AI technologies, including the ones you've just listed.
So I'll say a couple of things. First, I'm not technically a doctor, although I do very much appreciate the title. I feel like it would be remiss not to correct that one. Second, I would say that it is perhaps outside my area of expertise to offer recommendations for the committee. I understand that they're very valuable and very essential, but I feel like I can comment most on the data.
That we can accept that. Since we're on familiar terms, Nestor, if I could, can you just state for the record whether or not, given your subject matter expertise, and I would still suggest, given your credentials, you have subject matter expertise, whether or not you support a moratorium on the use of facial recognition technologies and other forms of AI by law enforcement until government is adequately able to catch up to its impacts?
I will again say that I think answering that question is outside of my scope of expertise, and I would defer more to the other witness on the panel that I think has a bit more experience in this domain and can comment a bit more authoritatively.
In your view, then, could you perhaps comment on best practices that Canada should learn from in comparison to other AI legislations and jurisdictions?
I would say perhaps not necessarily as a best practice, but just kind of a point of reality. I think one of the big takeaways from this year AI Index report is that AI is becoming increasingly ubiquitous in all of our lives. I mean, 10 years ago, there was a lot of AI problems that were very difficult to solve. And this meant that AI was something that was just being researched. Whereas, you move forward 10 years, AI is now one of those things that is coming out of the lab and moving into the real world. And a lot of companies are very, very excited about using AI technologies. And you're going to start seeing them used more and more. Investment in AI is going through the roof. The number of AI patents is going through the roof. And very often, I would say a lot of companies are quite keen to use AI before perhaps coming to terms with some of the negative ways in which they can be deployed. And I think very often, as a regulator, it might be worth kind of asking, when should we care about this? When is the time to kind of regulate? I would say that
I have to cut you off. I'm very sorry to do so, but we're getting further behind, and I'm going to have to cut the times for the subsequent rounds, and I still think we might end up having to squeeze a little past 5:30 to get in a few minutes of community business. So I'm going to go 4 minutes each to Mr. Bazan and Mr. Fergus, 2 each for Mr. Villemure and Mr. Green, and then 4 each for Mr. Couric and Ms. Hefner. So go ahead, Mr. Bazan, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for appearing today. And so, Mr. Maslej, you were ripping off quite a bit of data, hard percentages after looking at it, and yet in your Artificial Intelligence Index report of 2021, you said there wasn't enough data out there. So have you collected enough data to help us as regulators develop the legislative framework to control artificial intelligence or provide the right policy framework in which to move ahead on things like facial recognition?
I would say yes. I think that AI is obviously something that changes day by day. I mean, 2022 has been a tremendous year of AI progress. It seemed like every week there was a new model that was breaking ground. Now, I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where we'll have data to sufficiently know the answer to every question, but we're getting more data, and an absence of absolute data does not mean that we shouldn't take action. We know, for instance, as I've cited earlier, that a lot of these facial recognition systems perform a lot worse on these kind of wild photos where individuals are not looking into the camera straight, where lighting is not super good. And that might have important implications about how these technologies are regulated. So I would say that we're still far away from getting to a point where we're going to have data to answer every single question, but we are getting more data. And I do think that the data we have at the moment is sufficient to take action on certain different issues.
So through committee here, we've heard quite a bit about the shortfalls in how the data has been accumulated, how the technology has been adapted, but with bias and prejudice. And so do we feel that we are at a position, in your case, coming from Stanford University, that things are more, I guess, balanced in that side of the equation? Or, and I'll ask in my last final minutes here to Ms. Pelosi as well, like, what about the chances for abuse, the false positives, and ultimately those that want to, definitely use this to provide further human rights abuses?
Well,
so I can perhaps go first, and then I'll defer to Mrs. Polsky. I would say that certainly, again, there are definitely questions that remain unanswered, but we do have a lot of data that does say things that are difficult to dispute. As mentioned, this paper that I cited earlier does show that facial recognition systems can be biased, and I think that's a generally well accepted fact, and that can be something that a committee of regulators can act on. But I'll defer to Mrs. Polsky for an additional answer.
Thank you. I go back. I'm not an academic. I leave that to you, sir. But I go back to news reports out of the Welsh Police, where the senior ranking officers said that facial recognition, and I'm paraphrasing, came up with something like 92% false positives. And he said that was okay because no technology is perfect. That was 2017. In 2020 or 21, the chief of police of Chicago, I believe it was, said that facial recognition was something like 95% erroneous. That can have profound implications on people's lives, because once you are identified as a person of interest, you're in the system. And then anytime a cop looks at you, they run your name, you're already there. So there's already a presumption that they should look a little more closely at you because the facial recognition got it wrong.
Thank you, Ms. Polsky. And with that, we'll go to Mr. Fergus for up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr.
Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today, and through you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to, I would have asked this question of both our witnesses, but following up on what Mr. Green had asked, but I will ask this question of Mrs. Polsky, given that our other witness didn't want to pronounce on this issue, but Ms. Polsky, you just, in answering a question from my colleague, had indicated the problem with false positives and the extremely high percentage of false positives, or in the order of 19 times out of 20. Given that you have pointed out those numbers, and given that a number of our witnesses before this committee have pointed out that facial recognition technology we should place a moratorium on its use until by the use by the public and perhaps even the private sector on its use until a framework for this technology is put in place. I guess my question would be, do you feel that there should be a moratorium? Would you agree with those witnesses that there should be a moratorium on the use of FRT at this in public spaces as well by private spaces?
The short answer is yes, considering that several years ago when I did some research, Toronto already had 15,000 CCTV cameras public use. That doesn't include what's in stores, cars, cell phones, all the rest of it. Calgary replaced its lamp standards with a new type of light, but the lamp standards themselves, the 80,000 of them, are capable of having microphones, cameras, high-res cameras, and watching and listening to everything and everybody. And all too often, we have public bodies not doing the facial rec or any of these AI embedded technologies themselves, but they engage private sector organizations to do it and get around the accountability. So I would say there needs to be a moratorium on public and private usage of it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Polsky. I'm also interested, Mr. Masley, is again, going back to Chapter 3 of your report, and I've had an opportunity to read your report, I've had an opportunity to speak to you about the report in advance of this meeting. I was wondering if you could just talk about how you feel what does your report feel in terms of what type of measures need to be adopted by the community to eliminate the bias that you'll find in the algorithms in order to promote, so that we'd be able to promote better fairness in terms of the FRT's ability to accurately reduce bias against females, against people of color, as much as possible. How do these measures? What's a report on progress on that you've seen over the last couple of years?
So I will say that our report doesn't make any concrete recommendations for steps that should be taken. I think it's more trying to take stock of where the AI landscape is. But I will make a couple of points. I think first, the report, I think, would clearly imply that there should be a greater consciousness that AI tools are going to become increasingly ubiquitous and that a lot of these tools are flawed. They're not perfect. And sometimes people are going to use these tools without being aware of what their flaws may be. But perhaps we should be asking ourselves the question of how they might be flawed a lot sooner before we're actually using them. On the second point, I will say that we do have a chapter 5, that looks at legislator interest.
Sorry, Mr. Masley, but let me just interrupt you there, just because I have very little time. Drat it. Well, this will be very quick because you did point out that you're saying that there's reason to give some greater consideration for the use of this technology. Well, wouldn't that then lead you or the report to come to the conclusion that there should be a moratorium until greater certainty can be, or greater accuracy can be brought to bear for the use of this technology? Yes or no, if that's possible?
Again, I will politely decline to answer that question.
Okay.
I don't think the report.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Then we'll, with that, we'll move to Monsieur Villemeux pour 2 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Polsky. We're often told that we have to use FRT data in order to create a sense of security. But mass surveillance, in the way that you are describing it and how we understand it, don't you think that it might create a more sense of insecurity? What do you think?
I have to agree with you, because keeping in mind the people who are telling us that there is great demand for these new technologies are the vendors, are the ones that will profit from it. It's as simple as that.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Maslev,
Thank you. Mr. Maslev, on page 62 of your report, you talk about algorithms and so on, but how do we perfect algorithms by collecting a lot of data without it becoming surveillance?
Well, I think that is one of the challenges in this kind of endeavor. And I would say that, broadly speaking, it's a matter of, I think, asking the question of how we're going about collecting that data. I think that in an absence of a regulatory framework, it is easy perhaps for different companies to operate in different kinds of capacities. But I think if rules are more clearly ironed out and identified, it is easier to have players operating on the same field. So it is certainly a challenge. Data is essential in the operation of these systems, but just because data is essential, I would say as an individual, again, not representing my institution, that does not imply that we shouldn't have any kind of regulations or
merci. Je vous interromps parce qu'il nous reste.
Apologies for interrupting you. We do have only a few seconds left. Ms. Polsky, can you please provide us in written format the elements that you think are interesting in the European legislation on the protection of data and FRT?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. If I would.
Est-ce que vous pourriez nous fournir des écrits sur les politiques qui sont
If you can provide in written format the findings in Europe of the FRT and data collection.
Certainly, I'd be pleased to.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mr. Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just for my own edification, it's a question I'm always, wondering about when we have expert witness. I'm just wondering to Mr. Masley, could he state whether or not Stanford and the Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence Center are funded by any AI companies or anything? Like, are there any potential conflicts, just to put on the record?
So I'm not familiar of the financial situation that surrounds the Institute, but I also want to clarify that I'm speaking here as an individual and mostly to just present the data that the index has on facial recognition. My views are not those of Stanford.
That's good. Okay. So the AI index report indicates that language models are now more capable than ever before, but also more biased. Can you elaborate on that statement? Why are these models becoming more biased as they become more advanced, and what risk does that pose?
Well, part of the reason they're becoming more biased is because typically these models are being fed increasingly large number of data. And for certain models, it is advantageous for these models to have a lot of data. And the more data you give the model, the more likely it is that the model is going to get some unideal data. And I think we saw this in the report with this model CLIP, which is a multimodal linguistic model. This model was asked, for instance, to assign the probability of an American astronaut, Eileen Collins, being, like, what is this image of? And the model assigned a higher probability of this image being a photograph of a smiling housewife in an orange jumpsuit with the American flag than, this being a photograph of an astronaut with the American flag. That's not our finding. That's a finding from a paper of Berthane and al. 2021. But it's illustrative of the fact that when you give these data a lot of models, which might be required for higher performance, they might catch some conspiratorial and biased data. And if we're not filtering that data proactively, it could be very likely that these models can behave in toxic and problematic ways.
Can these biases be mitigated, and if so, how?
Well, one of the things that I allude to, and we talk about this in the report, is the issue of filtration, where you can perhaps mandate that companies filter the kind of data that they use to train their systems on. Now, it's been reported in different papers that there can perhaps be a filtration tax, that if you filter data before you apply it to a model, the model might not perform as optimally if you gave it unfiltered data, because naturally the more data a model has, typically the better it can perform on certain tasks. So filtration can be an avenue to do that, but it also might present some trade-off for businesses.
We're over again. I'm sorry, and we're going to end up going a little over time here. I promised our last two members 4 minutes each, so I'll stick with that and go to Mr. Kirk for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your expertise and coming before us today. Ms. Polsky, with regard to recommendation 19 in your report, if a foreign national is negatively impacted by an in-Canada FRT project, what would you suggest is the action, corrective or otherwise, that should be taken?
Forgive me, but I don't have the report on screen. But if it affects a foreign national, in the same way, I'd say that immigrants to Canada who are not yet landed immigrants or citizens have constitutional rights and charter protection. Perhaps that needs to be afforded to them as well. That is something that needs further exploration for sure.
Okay, thank you for that. So if I could to the second recommendation, I appreciate that it's very helpful just as a note for witnesses for recommendations to come forward, because that certainly helps committees in the structures of the reports that we are able to put together. But the second recommendation, when it comes to quote a broad society-wide unquote database, how could such a database cause harm, possibly be abused to those who may be found in that database? And I guess the inverse of that, how those who are not within that database, how could they possibly be harmed as well?
A simple example of something that's going on in Canada, unregulated once again, and we surveyed the residential tenancy boards across the country, is something, it's an app that if you want to rent an apartment or a house, it's a tenancy app where you can't put pen to paper and fill out an application form. You must use this app. It also creates, if you will, a blacklist of tenants, because the landlords can put in whatever information, whatever comments. She was late on her rent by 2 days. She has a kid that's loud, whatever they want. And other potential landlords can look at this and say, I'm not renting to this person. What happens not only to the person who wants to rent a home and doesn't know that this comment exists, they have no recourse. Do they become homeless as a result? In the States, apparently this is going on. And some of these also require that the applicants submit their facial biometrics and other biometrics, very, very personal information that wouldn't be allowed to be requested elsewhere. Profound implications.
It's interesting because recently watching a television show where that was one of the case studies and the profound possible impacts. So to move from the tenancy example, if I could, to there's been collection of data at Toronto Pearson, the international airport that I'm sure all of us on this call have been through countless times, but it would have resulted, I can only imagine, in an unbelievable amount of data collection, which includes Canadians, individuals visiting our country, and everywhere in between. I'm just curious if there's any further thoughts, recommendations, or concerns that you would highlight in how an organization like an airport or another entity regarding with law enforcement.
You've used all of your time. We haven't got any time for an answer. I'll maybe allow Ms. Polsky maybe 5 seconds if you've got a very succinct point to make in response to that lengthy question.
Between Beyond the Border, pre-clearance, the Customs Act, all the rest of the legislation that has impact on this, we have to look at not in isolation, but as a whole for the entire system.
Okay. Thank you. And Ms. Hefner for the final 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for your testimony here today. Mr. Masley, you talked about this in your opening statement, but I found it really interesting in the research from the 2022 AI Index report that in 2017, facial recognition technology had about a 50% error rate, and by 2021, there were no platforms with an error rate greater than 3%. I'm wondering if you can reflect on that. Like, why have we seen such technological advancement? How has this happened, and what are the ramifications and implications for the future based on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say the reason that you've seen this technical advancement is because AI systems are getting better across the board. I think there's been a lot of developments in the architecture that powers these systems. These systems now run on better hardware, which means they're able to operate at much faster speeds. So there is a lot of academic and business reasons why these systems are operating better. In terms of consequences, again, I think all of this portends and points to the fact that AI is going to become a part of our lives, whether we like it or not. And as I have spoken to today, with AI systems, there's a lot that AI systems can do, but there's also a lot that they can do that we didn't expect them to do or didn't perhaps want them to do. And I think rather than just kind of welcoming these systems into our lives with open arms, it's important to kind of, again, ask what kind of effects they might ultimately have. And again, if we live in a world where, for instance, FRTs are now having incredibly high success rates, it might be a lot easier for companies to justify that they ought to be used. But that, again, doesn't necessarily imply that we shouldn't think critically about how they ought to be perhaps regulated or managed by government officials.
Answer. Ms. Polsky, you and I have spoken already, and you've spoken a bit about this today, but you make a really good case for the fact that we don't have enough education around facial recognition technology. And I'm wondering what your suggestions are around education. How do we improve this? What do we need to do specifically around education?
I think it would be important to mandate that the Privacy Commissioner and for the individual provinces as well that have substantially similar legislation, that all legislation require that the Privacy Commissioner's offices be fully funded firstly, and that they have a separate fund, fully funded, for education. They don't all have an education mandate. They do some work to educate, but there needs to be a much more formalized program, because that will translate into people being better aware of the legislation, their rights, responsibilities. They will build that into the technology. And then when you do have a technology, one thing that could be done is have it tested in a sandbox, a neutral sandbox run by the Privacy Commissioner, as an opportunity not only for the Commissioner to examine it, civil society groups to examine it, the corporations to allow it to be examined in a trusted, neutral setting that does not violate their copyright or their intellectual property. And that way it gets tested and approved before it's allowed for sale in Canada. Fund it and fund the education through the Privacy Commissioner's office, again, without influence of industry, please.
Seconds left, so I'll just thank you all for your time today. It was very helpful and very interesting.
Okay, and thank you. And with that, I do thank our witnesses, and I would like, although I must now, as quickly as possible, ask them to disconnect. We will be disconnecting this Zoom and beginning an in-camera Zoom for hopefully just a couple of quick minutes of housekeeping committee business. So with that, meeting suspended pending the in-camera Zoom call.
Thank you.